places. In the United States, that least socialist of countries, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, a proclaimed Democratic Socialist and a veteran of the YPSL, nearly won the Democratic nomination in 2016 and inspired other proclaimed socialists to win seats in Congress and state houses in 2018. Meanwhile, in Great Britain, the Labour Party, once the exemplar of a socialist party that had gone conservative, was taken over by Jeremy Corbyn, who is not merely a radical socialist but a warm supporter of various communist regimes and movements. I cannot imagine that either the United States or the United Kingdom will be remade as socialist, but the rise of Sanders and Corbyn shows anew the power of this idea. On the other hand, Russia and even more so China, the two communist giants of the 20th century, seem poised to shape and perhaps to dominate international life in the decades ahead. Russia is no longer communist, and China, though still ruled by the Communist Party, is no longer socialist. Yet these influential countries, one with the world's largest population, the other with its largest landmass, were largely shaped or misshaped by their communist experience and retain its earmarks in their current guises. In this new edition, I have not emended any of the chapters of the original book which cover the history of the previous centuries, other than to correct a few small, though embarrassing, errors and to update my account of the evolution of Israel's kibbutzim. But I have added a long epilogue telling the story of this afterlife as it is unfolded thus far in the first decades of the new century. Prologue. Changing Faiths. Socialism was the faith in which I was raised. It was my father's faith and his father's before him. My grandfather, Avraham Chaim Muravchik, grew up in a small shtetl outside Kiev in what was then the Russian Empire. Born in 1878, he received the orthodox religious training of every boy of his time and place. But like many others of that generation, he turned away from formal Judaism by the time he entered high school, or gymnasium as it was called. It was in the radical student circle at gymnasium that he met my grandmother, Rachel. She was several years his junior, since he had not been able to afford the school until he had worked for a time as a lumberman, while her family, which manufactured paper bags and lived in Kiev proper, was better off. Together they joined the most radical of the newly formed Russian leftist parties, the Socialist Revolutionaries. It was distinguished from the more Marxist-oriented Social Democrats by its endorsement of terror tactics and by its theory that the leading role in the revolution would be played by Russia's peasantry rather than its proletariat. Avraham Chaim and Rachel left for America in 1905, part of a wave of Jewish emigration touched off by an orgy of anti-Semitic violence that followed Russia's defeat by Japan and the abortive attempt to overthrow the Tsar. The peasants, it turned out, were more easily mobilized for pogroms than for revolution. In America, the couple found work with the Yiddish-language Jewish Daily Forward, whose masthead was emblazoned with the famous injunction of the Communist Manifesto, "Workers of the World Unite." They settled in a Harlem tenement in which my father, Emanuel, was born in 1916. Emanuel's boyhood was filled with the comings and goings of the exiled branches of the Russian Students' Organization and the Left Socialist Revolutionaries. The party had split in 1917, and my grandparents stuck with the more radical half. In 1929, Norman Thomas ran for mayor of New York on the Socialist Party ticket, and the campaign crystallized my father's budding interest in socialism. He chose it as the topic of an 8th grade paper, and after 4 intense days in the library, pronounced himself a convert. A few months later, just after his 13th birthday, he joined the Socialist Party. It was a coming of age that substituted for a bar mitzvah. My mother, Miriam, whom he met in college, shared my father's views, albeit with softer ideological definition. Being of liberal spirit, however, they decided to refrain from systematically indoctrinating me and my brother as they raised us. Systematic indoctrination was scarcely necessary, at any rate, for the political cause was the center of their lives. It was discussed at the family dinner table and with their friends, who were mostly comrades. On car excursions, we whiled away the time by singing "We Shall Not Be Moved" and other old labor songs. I first visited our nation's capital in 1958 at the age of 11, when my parents took us on the